greed that doomed the Russian occupiers. Near Berdyansk, during a special operation, Chechen Kadyrovites were sent to the afterlife, reports the main intelligence directorate. Ukrainian partisans discovered that the valiant marauders of Don had set up a scheme to sell the fuel they themselves had stolen. The bearded men were selling diesel at the same spot on the highway near Berdyansk. That very spot ultimately became their mass grave. As a result of targeted strikes by the main intelligence directorate, 2 vehicles used by the Akhmat fighters were successfully destroyed. And that's not all. This weekend, Putin also lost 2 tankers from his shadow fleet. These tankers, which are under sanctions for their involvement in transporting Russian oil, were attacked in the Black Sea by Ukrainian Sea Baby drones.
So the Ukrainian drones encountered the Kairos tanker and the Virat. I think that's right. The incident happened near the coast of Turkey, but in neutral waters, so there can't be any claims against us. So how did it happen? It's reported that these were SPU drones. Well, that's what the sources are saying. But these sources apparently aren't just ordinary ones. They're very special because they also leaked the video. And this attack on Russian, well, de facto, not de jure, but de facto Russian tankers is going to have some truly incredible consequences. We finally decided to implement our own sanctions on this issue. So we're attacking not only Novorossiysk, not only Tuapse, but also accordingly these tankers that are transporting oil, or, well, in this case, not transporting, but used to transport it.
Russians will find no peace, neither at sea nor on land. In fact, the armed forces of Ukraine are giving the occupiers no respite on every single section of the front. Ukrainian border guards have recently shared a detailed video report showcasing the important work they've successfully done. Their drone operators destroyed enemy shelters, communication equipment, and UAV control antennas in the north Slobozhansk direction. As a result, the enemy in this direction has effectively lost its eyes and ears and is temporarily unable to conduct full-scale combat operations. The situation for the enemy is no better even in their own rear. There, in the vicinity of the village of Mokra Orlovka in the Belgorod region, our MiG-29 fighter from the Ghost of Kiev unit carried out precision strikes on the occupiers' command post. The Kremlin does not admit which of the Russian generals was hit by the Ukrainian fighter's strike. However, Ukrainian intelligence hints that as a result of the raid, the Russian army may have lost several high-ranking military officials at once. Nevertheless, the Russian army continues to put on a brave face despite the setbacks and is desperately trying to prove to the whole world, and apparently to Putin himself first and foremost, that the so-called special military operation declared by Moscow is going according to plan. So, following the old tradition, Russian flag bearers tried to raise their tricolor over a building in Vovchansk. Supposedly, this meant the settlement was already under the occupiers' control. But there was a hitch. A Ukrainian drone disagreed with them.
We're kind of sending a message to Vladimir Putin, and not just to Vladimir Putin, that all his stories about everything going according to plan and him being in a state of permanent goida, and that none of this affects him, well, his assessment of the situation is actually a bit off.
And here are unique shots from a Ukrainian unmanned ground vehicle equipped with an M2 Browning machine gun. In the middle of the night, it encountered Russian armored vehicles on the road. For the occupiers, the encounter was a complete surprise, and for the crew of the MTLB and the armored vehicle itself, it was their last combat mission. They were left not only without their equipment, but also without the means to deliver it. Even in the rear, Russian occupiers can only dream of peace. And it's all thanks to dedicated partisans. Recently, they carried out a successful sabotage operation in Bryansk, delivering a precise strike against enemy railway logistics. As a result, the electric locomotive used by the Russian army to transport military cargo was turned into a pile of scrap metal, creating significant supply problems for the occupying front and disrupting the schedules of trains carrying ammunition, equipment, and fuel that were being prepared for dispatch to the front lines in the Sumy direction. Overall, in the past 24 hours, the Russians have lost at least 5 tanks, 7 artillery systems, 2 multiple rocket launchers, as well as another 1,000 soldiers.
Russians, a big hello to you.
The entire armed forces of Ukraine have regained control of the situation at Hulyaipole. In the area of the settlement, more than 20 attempts to storm our positions were repelled, and no new breakthrough occurred. This is reported by the defense forces of southern Ukraine.
Today, a new defensive line has been established at Hulyaipole, a new line of defense. Accordingly, the landscape of this area will be taken into account. This is not the industrial Donbass, unfortunately. However, there are rivers and forest plantations where it is possible to maintain the positions we currently hold.
As it became known after the Russian advance in this direction, the command decided to redeploy part of the reserves to Hulyaipole. At the same time, Russia has already rushed to claim that its troops have entered the district center itself. However, this information has been refuted by our Center for Countering Disinformation. The rumors spread by public channels about the occupation of the village of Vysoky have also not been confirmed.
They have come right up to our heavily fortified defensive area and critical logistics center. They are actively trying to send separate small groups to the immediate outskirts of the town of Hulyaipole, attempting to probe our defenses. Once again, there is intense fighting going on. Our brave defenders there have apparently received some much-needed resources and crucial reinforcements, allowing them to better hold their ground. And there is an ongoing struggle to stabilize the situation in this direction.
At the same time, analysts say that Pokrovsk remains the main focus of the enemy's efforts. Attacks are taking place around the clock, both in the city itself and on its outskirts, in the hope of encircling the Ukrainian group.
The enemy currently controls a substantial portion of the city of Pokrovsk, specifically the southern and central districts, and is actively attempting to execute such aggressive actions, as well as gradually encircle it completely, thereby tightening the strategic ring around the neighboring city of Mirnograd.
However, in their endless assaults in the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians are suffering enormous losses. Our command does not hide the fact. The main task of the armed forces of Ukraine today is to inflict maximum damage on the enemy group, and the defense forces are doing an excellent job at this.
The losses are so great that they have to use reserves that in theory were not intended to enter Pokrovsk. That is, even with their operational reserves, Russia cannot take Pokrovsk. Right now, on average, more than 200 enemy bodies are being laid down per square kilometer. That is both killed and wounded, and that's an enormous number.
At the same time, in addition to defending, our troops in Pokrovsk sometimes manage to advance as well. In particular, as reported from the ground, there are periodic sweeps of the enemy beyond the railway line, which now serves as a kind of dividing line in the city.
The defense forces are indeed succeeding in counterattacks which are being carried out among other places near Pokrovsk. We're talking about Kupiansk. We're talking about almost all our locations where the Russians are trying to advance.
Speaking of Kupiansk, according to Putin himself, the city is surrounded and under Russian control. In reality, there is no encirclement at all, and there are fewer and fewer Russians in the settlement with each passing day.
Unfortunately, the enemy is still present in Kupiansk for now. It is quite possible that the defense forces will be able to improve their tactical positions. Today, I'm not saying that we will be able to completely drive out the enemy, although the current trend in Kupiansk shows that the defense forces, meter by meter, are managing to clear our Ukrainian land of the enemy.
And good news came yesterday from the occupied territories. In particular, details have emerged about the strike on Crimea. Thus, the General Staff reported that on the peninsula, the Panzer S-1 and Tor-2M air defense systems were attacked, after which drones managed to destroy a warehouse of Orion and 4-post drones, as well as strike a command post and a concentration of enemy personnel.
Local social media groups were in a panic, claiming that all sorts of devices were flying, even Mavics. And Mavics have a range of 10 kilometers. Where were they launched from and by whom? Well, it's clear it wasn't the Ukrainian military. So then who was it and from where? So these are those very same maritime drones whose involvement was again confirmed by social media groups and which were obviously acting as mini aircraft carriers delivering Mavics, which then take off and destroy the target. In this sense, Mavics are actually the perfect tool. So if they manage to deliver them to the shore from there on, they're practically indestructible tools.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Essentially, the defense forces used a new tactic where one large drone delivers many smaller ones to the attack site. And considering that everything went successfully, it looks like the Russian rear will soon have a lot more problems. In the past 24 hours, 3 platoons have been eliminated and more than a platoon have been wounded. The General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces shared details about the battles for Pokrovsk. Thus, the defense forces destroyed exactly 60 Russian assault troops who, in the fog, tried to advance to the city center and gain a foothold. Another 23 people were wounded. As a result, the occupiers' attempt to break through failed. At the same time, the enemy is still holding the old positions they took several days ago. According to the command of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, they are currently conducting search and assault operations. And the entire city, in fact, continues to remain a gray zone.
The enemy, who entered through the southern outskirts of Pokrovsk, has already established a certain foothold there. However, the foothold is already being supplied logistically. Accordingly, the gray zone is very large, probably most of the city today. Although the lines on the northern outskirts of the city, in the northern part of Pokrovsk, are being held today, in particular by our paratroopers.
Another direction that regularly appears in military reports is the Kupiansk area. Despite Gerasimov's report about encircling around 5,000 Ukrainian soldiers there, our command denies this information, instead reporting successes and advances by the defense forces.
Today, it has not yet been possible to push the enemy out of Kupiansk itself. However, the counterattacking actions that the defense forces are demonstrating today are a gradual advance. These are not any sudden counter-offensive operations, but specifically counterattacking actions. Nevertheless, they are leading to our defense forces managing to regain some tactical positions that were lost there several weeks or even months ago, specifically within the city of Kupiansk itself.
The Russians have also become more active in the south of our country. The Zaporizhzhia direction, from where the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine was pulling reserves to Pokrovsk, had been bringing rather alarming reports for several weeks. However, the situation has now been stabilized.
The active offensive that, as they claim, took place a week ago is no longer happening. Now we are carrying out strikes and using firepower against their reserves. What is especially important is that now they have started to destroy the railway that supplies these groups.
The situation in Zaporizhzhia, analysts say, remains difficult. The enemy continues to concentrate forces and, using sabotage groups, is infiltrating villages under Ukrainian control along the bottom of the Kakhovka reservoir. However, these attacks keep failing time and again.
The Russians once again failed to take Stepnohirsk or even the multi-story buildings in the southern part of the settlement. Only part of the buildings are under enemy control. Additional pressure on Stepnohirsk is being created by the enemy's attempts to break through along the road to Kryhorivka. North of the seaside Dakas, there is a large open area, so the Russians don't even try to gain a foothold there. Instead, at great risk to themselves, they dash a bit further north, where there are buildings and at least some kind of trench line.
But as the enemy advances in the open field thanks to our artillery, they suffer enormous losses there, which is why the occupiers are no longer given vehicles and are sent into the assault exclusively on foot.
Close, really very close.
At the same time, the defense forces managed to strike not only along the front line, but also deep in the Russian rear. In particular, the past day was marked by an unprecedented event. Special Operations Forces shot down a Russian Mi-8 military helicopter with a long-range drone directly over Russian territory. As noted by the agency, this opens a new chapter in the war, offering the Ukrainian armed forces capabilities never seen before.
The fact is that previously Ukrainians shot down helicopters in the air using regular FPV drones with a maximum range of just a few dozen kilometers and warheads weighing about 1.5 kilograms. In this case, however, we see that it was not necessary to ram the drone into the helicopter precisely because of the powerful warhead. But on the other hand, as you can see, this is happening at a different altitude, one that regular FPV drones might not be able to reach. And what's very important, according to some sources, though this still needs to be clarified, is that this is happening at a very long distance. In this case, we're talking about the Rostov region near the area of Kutenikovo. And what is Kutenikovo? Well, basically, it's 200 kilometers from the line of contact.
The occupied territories were also hit. Part of the Donetsk region was plunged into a total blackout, which partially paralyzed the command of Russian forces. Among more than a dozen successful strikes, the explosions in Dokuchayevsk are particularly noteworthy. Analysts are still debating whether the nighttime glow was the result of a strike on a power plant or an ammunition depot.
Whatever the specific cause, both scenarios ultimately represent significant blows to logistical operations. Because if a critical substation is completely destroyed, the entire group inevitably loses its essential electricity supply. If the strike hits the ammunition depot, the group loses its shells. And this is important for the group that is currently advancing in the Donetsk region. In other words, at the very least, it slows down their offensive potential.
At the same time, fighters on the ground are confirming this information. In particular, due to intensified strikes on Russian logistics in the Donetsk region, assault units have lost their steady supply of reinforcements and weapons and have lost momentum in their advance in Pokrovsk as well.